Grace, mercy and peace be with you all. As we journey through this year, one of the most striking effects of the global pandemic are the landmarks and milestones that have been altered or swept away for each one of us. Each of us carry personal disappointments and frustration at the celebrations and life events that have either been deferred or cancelled altogether. It feels important that we should not underestimate the cumulative effect of all of this that it has upon our mental health and general well-being. For it is as we begin acknowledging these losses and their impact upon us that we recognise the burdens that we are currently carrying and wrestling with, something that can be profoundly helpful to us in our coping in the present moment. In Matthew's Gospel, we find some encouraging words of Jesus that may help us in times like this. Come to me, all of you that are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke and put it on you. Learn from me, because I am gentle and humble in spirit, and you will find rest. Friendship with God and finding faith in Jesus is all about the possibility of burdens being eased, the burden of failure being lifted through the grace of forgiveness. This was the experience of the early disciples, like Peter, who so often came up short, but was still received and restored in his relationship with Jesus. Even Peter, who at the end in Jerusalem denied knowing Jesus 3 times, was restored and his burden lifted. Peter may well have felt that he'd gone too far, that his personal failure was too great to be healed and restored. But what Peter's experience tells us is that there is no burden too great or heavy that is beyond God's power to heal and restore. If this can work for Peter with his heavy load, then it can certainly work for you and me too. In today's Bible reading from Matthew 25, we find the parable of the 3 servants, with Jesus addressing issues surrounding a final judgment. Here is a reminder that on the last day, as Jesus returns to gather us together, our lifetime's behaviour and deeds will be assessed and weighed. We will remain accountable for what we have accomplished in life or left undone, but always forgiven for our shortcomings through the cross. In the parable, we have 3 servants, each given an enormous sum of money, equivalent to something like 15 years' wages, and they're told to put it to use whilst their master is away. Each servant does so, but with contrasting results. When the master returns, 2 servants have doubled their master's money, are highly commended with the words, "Well done, you good and faithful servant." In contrast, the 3rd servant returns the money that the master has lent him, but without any profit or loss. The servant defends his actions by stating, "I know that you are a hard man. You reap harvests where you did not sow, and you gather crops where you did not scatter seed. I was afraid, so I went off and hid your money in the ground." The master is harsh in his judgment of this servant, describing him as bad and lazy before throwing him out. What are we to make of this parable and the master's different responses to the 3 servants that range from apparently being generous and philanthropic on the one hand, through to harsh and unjust on the other? We're presented with a dilemma, and that is often the effect of a parable. This is certainly not a blind endorsement of capitalism, but it's a teasing exploration of what the terms good and faithful mean in this context. As one biblical commentator has remarked, being good and faithful is more than theological correctness, passive waiting, or strict obedience to clear instructions. It requires active responsibility that takes initiatives and risks. So it seems then that Jesus requires us to do something with our faith. And here we can recall how he regularly sent out his disciples 2 by 2, like the 72, to heal the sick and proclaim the good news that the kingdom of heaven has drawn near. It's also telling that the motivation behind the action of the 3rd servant was fear of his master. But fear is not always helpful in any decision-making process, because it can prevent us from doing the right thing. It rather depends upon what we are fearful of. In the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, we're told that the fear of the Lord is instruction in wisdom, and humility goes before honour. And so by implication, the source of this fear in Proverbs can be helpful to us. But a fear that incapacitates us, that causes us to freeze, that somehow diminishes the fullness of life that we are promised as followers of Jesus, is not what we are made for. In an age when our fears on many fronts have been magnified, let us be mindful of the promise that perfect love, the perfect love that we find in Jesus, drives out fear. And let us rest upon these words that we find in 1 John. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear involves punishment. The one who fears has not been perfected in love. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. And so, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and may you know the Lord's love this day. Amen.